We've all been told that healing is about mindset, but your work turns that idea upside down.
I used to have a chronic skin condition, trying all these different healing modalities, and it was really stemming from unresolved trauma. It doesn't matter how much you're trying to regulate yourself, because you always end up hitting the block inside of that.
As an oncologist, I've been with thousands of people who've been at the end of their life. I knew that that was their number one regret. And then I'm like, oh my God, like if I actually followed this is like blowing up my whole life. Hello, I'm Dr. Katie Deming, and this is the Born to Heal podcast, where we share practical tools and knowledge to help you create conditions for true healing in your life. Let's welcome to the show trauma-informed transformational coach and somatic expert, Jakob Gričar. Is that right? Did I pronounce it correctly?
Yeah.
Welcome to the show, Jakob. It's nice to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited for this conversation.
Me too. So, Jakob, we've all been told that healing is about mindset and that if we just think differently, we'll feel differently. But your work turns that idea upside down. Why do you believe that true healing begins in the body, not in the mind?
There's a part of my story, and I'm sure we're going to at some point at least touch on that a little bit, is I used to have a chronic skin condition, and I realized at some point after processing that, working through that, healing that, trying all these different healing modalities, that it was stemming from unresolved trauma and stress. And as soon as I dealt with that through the level of the body, things started changing as well in the body, right? So when we have all these symptoms in the body, it's almost unfair to say that they all happen in the mind. And this is the neo-pop psychology thing that is starting to come up right now, which is, just work out on your mindset and your body is going to heal, right? Which it's somewhat true, but it's missing a core concept. And that's also the reason why majority of the therapy doesn't work. People would sometimes do 10, 20 years of talk therapy, but if it doesn't get to the root cause, which is the traumatic imprints that are stuck inside of the body, things actually don't really get fully resolved. So the way I look at that and the way I believe in terms of the body itself is the body keeps the score, but not just inside of the body, but in the mind-body matrix, which is our nervous system. So when something happened, when we felt unsafe, again, trauma isn't what happened, it's how you responded inside of that space of dysregulation. So when your nervous system carries an imprint, then that imprint reflects through all these different ways. A part of that is the mindset. So the imprint in the nervous system is actually where a lot of things in the psyche stem from. It's hard to resolve things in the psyche when the nervous system is dysregulated. So then through the psyche, there's all these beliefs that get created, all the imprints, all the injunctions. And all of these end up coming back into the body, creating stress, and then ultimately creating symptoms. So when we look at changing the mindset, that really works in many cases. But I think the thing that goes even deeper than that is working with the body and the nervous system. Because oftentimes when we resolve that, then the mindset follows and then the symptoms go away.
This is really interesting because when I was in Western medicine and then I left in 2022 and started an integrative practice, I had no idea. And literally all I knew was that what I was doing before was broken and that I wanted to step out into this new space. And I didn't really want to have formal training because I wanted to feel into what was true for me in my practice. But one of the things that I found that healing, and when I speak of healing for cancer, I'm talking about people who heal naturally, right? They don't do the things that Western medicine would say you have to do this to heal. These are people who have healed without doing those things. The very first thing that I identified that needs to happen is that you need to have a calm nervous system. That is the very first thing that I learned. So I love this. This is absolutely aligned with what I just know from my practice, that you can't do any of the other work. You can't make progress until you have a calm nervous system. So I love that you're starting here. Beautiful.
Yeah. All healing happens in the ventral vagal state. So when you're in an activated state, when you're hypervigilant, when you're in the sympathetic activation, when you're triggered, right? There's none of the healing can occur. If you look at the deeper states of our nervous system, we've got the rest and digest, which is the social engagement, when we connect with other people, when we digest, when we sleep. Those are the parasympathetic states, right? But then the really deep, profound, like healing actually happens when we go even beyond that, when we go deeper than that. That's why majority of us at this point, right? Wherever you look on the internet, you know the importance of sleep, you know the importance of getting 8 hours or 9 hours even of sleep, because it's where the regeneration happens, right? And the same regeneration is not going to happen in an activated system. So that's why I work with a lot of high performers and entrepreneurs and people who are up to big things in the world, but they often do all these big things at the expense of their health, with so much stress just running the show. And then it's just stress layered on top of that because of the traumatic imprints that are running the show. And then the body never actually gets to heal, never gets to process. So the first thing that has to happen is to create a calm in the nervous system, to create a space of regulation, to move somebody into the parasympathetic state. And then and only then the body can actually start going through the process of healing.
Beautiful. And so, I have ways that I work with people on calming the nervous system, but I'm curious to know, like, what are the ways that you do this with people? What are the simplest ways that people can calm their nervous system?
So the simplest ways would be the ones that we all know, but majority of the people aren't doing them, right? So meditation, deep breaths, just creating spaciousness in the body. There's 4, 7, 8 breaths. There's the becoming aware of like the space that's surrounding you. So for example, naming a couple of things that you can see, a couple of things that you can hear, a few things that you can smell, a few things that you can taste. And with that, you're orienting yourself to the present moment. Majority of anxiety, all of the anxiety, lives in the future, and majority of dysregulation, rumination, blame, resentment lives in the past. So if you orient yourself to the present moment, that's already a powerful tool. Then it's the breath. The breath is one of the biggest things that you can use to regulate yourself. Then there's also a few exercises that I like to show to my clients. For example, Basic Exercise by Stanley Rosenberg, which I'm not going to describe here, but everyone can Google it or search it on YouTube. But also just kind of like the basic ways to start regulating the nervous system. Now, an important thing inside of this is that when there's a traumatic imprint that hasn't been dealt with, then it doesn't matter how much you're trying to regulate yourself, because you'll always end up hitting the block inside of that. And there's going to be a trigger in your surrounding, and suddenly you're back in that imprint. And you're acting in all these dysregulated ways, and you don't know why, right? And how many people are in a relationship and their partner would say something, and suddenly they find themselves just like losing it and acting in the ways that they don't recognize, right? And they're like, I don't know who I was. I totally lost myself. And that's that traumatic imprint running the show. So when we talk about regulation, I think what's important to mention is also the excavation that's got to happen before the regulation takes place. And in a lot of the work that I do, really deep somatic trauma work, is going into those deeper spaces, processing the traumatic imprints that are there, and then seeing how regulation just naturally occurs at the other side of it. It's our natural way of being, coming back to the ventral vagal state.
I love that. So maybe you can define, what is somatic work? I think a lot of people hear this term, but then they don't know, well, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, and it's very normal, because when something gets popular, when people see that something works, they tend to take it, and then Instagram comes over, right? And then we have like the pop psychology terminology just being thrown around all the time. So somatic pretty much just means being in the body, right? Working with the body. So that's why we can use somatic in front of almost everything. Somatic parts work, somatic breath work, somatic movement. Obviously, movement is in nature already somatic, but in the ways that I'm using somatics, I'm using the term as using our body as a portal to get to these deeper traumatic imprints, process them, and create a sense of resolution. So it's similar to somatic experiencing, for example, by Peter Levine. My mentor is Judith Johnson, founder of Psychoneuroenergetics, one of the pioneers in somatic work as well. She's 83 years old. And what we do is we track sensations in the body. So a client would come with, for example, a relationship challenge, or they would come with some pain in the body. So it doesn't matter if it's a relational challenge, if it's a work challenge, if it's the edging on the burnout, right? If it's constant fear or looping in the mind, or if it's pain in the body. Regardless of what it is, we go into the body and we start tracking sensations in the body. And oftentimes when we listen deep enough, we go past these gross sensations like pain and tension, and we move into the subtle ones, which are heaviness, or just kind of like this heavy or tingling or pulsating. And when we get to those sensations, they often open up a body position. So we notice that the body becomes heavy and the body wants to curl up in the ball, or we feel like we're collapsing, or we feel like jittery and anxious. And that often triggers a memory. And that memory generally happens to be between 4 to 7, 8 years. It's where most of the people go. And that's where, for example, there's a memory of we wanted to express something, but our parents told us to shut up, right? Or there was a case of like molestation or physical abuse, or there was a case of being separated from a parent or something like that. And when that happens, the nervous system remembers that, because we're not resourced as children to protect ourselves, to consciously and cognitively understand that there's a different meaning. So if we're separated from the parent, the child at 5 years old is not going to be thinking, oh, that's totally reasonable. My dad has to go to work. That totally makes sense. No, the child starts feeling unsafe, and I'm alone. And if I'm alone, it's got to be because of me. Therefore, I am unworthy, right? And then you have this belief, I'm unworthy, running the show 30, 40, 50 years later. So what we do is basically we go into those memories and we create a safe space for all of that to be brought up. And once it's brought up, there's often a somatic response that comes with it. So that's why, and it's not prompted, it's not like force, like for example, in breath work, you need to force the breath, right? But here it's like the body does whatever the body naturally wants to do to release. And sometimes that's a lot of crying, sometimes that's screaming, sometimes that's shaking. And it just naturally occurs and it processes through the body. And on the other side of that, generally people start coming back to themselves. It's the easiest way to put it. Or maybe another way would be suddenly recognizing that there's a connection to higher power, which is, in our ventral vagal state, we tend to feel connected to everything. We tend to feel that feeling of unconditional love.
Beautiful. Well, and, I'm wondering with pain, you said it could be relational, it could be physical pain. Like I'm thinking right now, because my practice is prolonged water fasting. And I have several people in my water fasting program right now who have extreme pain. And they can't take anything, right? Because you're water fasting, and then they're just present with the pain. Even if it's not related to like a trauma, how would you approach someone like that? I'm just thinking, if this is one of the real challenges in my practice right now is physical pain, people who experience physical pain. And there's, the water fasting makes them be fully present now with the pain, and they haven't had to do that, right? They've been able to, whether it was take medications or distract themselves or whatever. And now it's like fully present and they can't sleep. They can't focus on anything other than it. I'm wondering if you have thoughts about that. Like how does it work with physical pain like that? I've discovered one tool that's completely transformed how my clients heal, resetting their metabolism, activating the body's natural healing, and giving them incredible mental clarity. That tool is water fasting, and you can access my free workshop all about fasting as a healing modality right now. I cover how fasting actually works in your body, the different types of fasts, and how to know which approach is right for you. And most importantly, how to do it safely. Whether you're navigating health challenges, have tried fasting before, or are completely new to it, this workshop is for you. I'll share real success stories from my practice and give you the framework I use with my clients. You can watch it now by accessing the link in this episode's description. This workshop could change how you think about healing entirely.
So many thoughts about it. That's my favorite place to be. And I say that as somebody who used to really distract myself. I used to find any ways that I could to numb, right? And if we look at the nature of addiction, we often look at addiction as like, that's not me, right? That's them. Or like, I'm not doing substances, therefore I'm not an addict. But the addiction essentially is a nervous system regulation strategy. And addiction can be addiction to social media, to food, to going out and connecting with friends. It can also be addiction to personal development, which I'm assuming a lot of your listeners are into, right? It's like, how can I like learn more or consume more? So all of these are the ways that we tend to numb from the things that we avoid feeling. And behind all of that generally is some form of pain. So even with heartbreak, for whoever is watching this or with you, if you've ever been heartbroken, like that it feels like physically somebody is ripping the heart out of your chest, right? And that physical pain is often why people turn towards substance. That's why, when there's a breakup, you go out with your friends and you drink because you want to forget about it, or you try to find another partner really quick so you don't have to think about it. But if you just be radically present with that pain in your chest, oftentimes, again, as I was sharing, it's going to take you really, really deep. And it tells you a story. And I remember when I was going through one of the most heart-shattering breakups exactly a year ago, actually, almost to the date, maybe a little bit longer. It was, I sat with the pain, and I remember I couldn't sleep. It was just so much pain in my chest. And then the story started unfolding, and it wasn't any longer about the other person. It became about my childhood when I was so deeply seeking love from my parents, and they were so busy working to try to keep us alive. And I remember just like being heartbroken in those moments, and that pain of longing for love, that then manifested in, seeking different romantic partners and all of that. And the reason why I share that is because physical pain was there. And oftentimes, if we're just really, really present with the pain, not just being present with it so that it goes away, but being present because it's there and it's trying to show us something and welcoming it, it starts telling us a story and a memory. So majority of the people who are experiencing a lot of physical pain do have certain traumatic imprints, and that pain is just trying to communicate. Now, when you deal with things, you can deal with them really quickly, right? If I have, for example, the breakup, if I take that breakup, because I sat with it, because I processed it, I was 3 weeks in different processes around uncovering different things in my psyche. This is no longer in my body. But let's say that what I did was pushed it away and drank it away or smoked it away or numbed it away or Instagram scored it away or even personal development it away, what would have happened is that those whispers of pain would then become screams. And that then manifests, in my opinion, from my philosophy, that manifests as chronic illness, that manifests as cancer, that manifests as, different disease. And I say that as somebody who used to have an autoimmune. And it was this same kind of like digging into where is this coming from? Where is that dysregulation that ended up like untangling it? So for your specific case, that's why I love fasting as well. And I feel like fasting with a very specific intention to connect to a higher power and to also like release and rebuke these things from the body to like, really uncover everything that is hidden is even more powerful. When you go into those spaces and you're like, not just fasting for the sake of fasting, but fasting for the sake of completely dissolving all of the traumatic imprints in the body can be really, really powerful.
Yeah, well, that's what I see. It's interesting because everyone comes to me because they want their tumor to go away, right? Because there's the whole autophagy thing that if you fast for longer than 7 days, the body will start to use diseased tissue. So that's what they all come to me for. But what's interesting is I'm like, I know that's why you came, but that's really not like why I'm so excited that you're here and what I see, because exactly what you describe is emotions come to the surface. Things are much easier to release. They don't have their drug of choice of numbing, whether, because I have them off the internet and limit their screen time and they're, not working. So they're, stuck with themselves. And what's interesting, I love actually the way that you describe that is because this is the way that I talk to them about the ones who have physical pain is that, yes, we're here for the physical healing and to eradicate cancer, but the healing of the cancer actually comes from a healed human being. And so what we're really doing here is we're connecting with our authentic self, with our source, and releasing all of that baggage, the trauma that we've accumulated on this journey. And so you can use that pain to become more present. So I'm glad that I'm not off base with that's the way that we've been approaching it. And I have other coaches, like I have an emotional release coach who works on techniques around that. But that is my experience. The ones who are able to use the pain as a way to go in and to become even more present with what's underneath there, it's beautiful. But I also realize it's really hard, right? People come into the fast. It's hard to fast. And then to be in this physical pain, some people are just looking to me like, how do you take this away? But I know that the healing doesn't come from taking it away. It comes from being able to be with it and dissolve it. Anyway, you just confirmed at least what I've been doing so far. So I feel better.
Yeah, and it's an interesting paradigm of being with something because you want it to be gone, right? Because what you resist persists. And what I've learned through my journey with chronic illness is it wasn't sitting with it so that it would go away. It was radically falling in love with the skin disease that I had, right? So if I can fall in love with my quote unquote condition, if I can meet it, welcome it, talk to it, allow it to be here for as long as it wants, then it actually ends up going away because then it feels met, it feels heard, it feels experienced. And it opens up the story of where this is actually coming from. But if you're being, for example, with grief, we know that, in order to be with an emotion, you have to feel it all the way through. Very cliche, but it's also true. But if you're only with the emotion because you know that it's going to go away at the end, you're not really being with it. Yeah. So it's being with the pain, but not being with the pain so that it goes away. It's just being with the pain. Just be with it. Just allow it to be there, experiencing the world as it is. And something that is interesting in the transformational coaching space is, what is transformation? What is growth? Growth is really just the discomfort that you don't run away from. And the more discomfort that you can be with, the more you grow. So can you look at the pain as the biggest opportunity for your growth and then just welcome it and want it? And then life becomes a series of wanting challenges and encouraging challenges and welcoming challenges. And then suddenly you have a much beautiful life.
Yeah, well, that is how we grow. We don't grow when everything is calm and stable. We grow when there are challenges. And I love that you said that too, because that is also my experience, is that, with the fast, what I find, and what's interesting is, I think what's beautiful about fasting is literally, you don't really need to do it because it happens naturally for them because they're just being present with what is. But this exact idea of not wanting the cancer to go away, but just surrendering to what is in this moment. And if the cancer is here, it's here as a teacher. Let's be with it. Let's just welcome whatever it's bringing for us. Because if we don't learn to do that, exactly what you said, we're resisting, and then that's going to persist. And that's what's creating the dis-ease in the body. So I'm finding that I think our work overlaps so beautifully. It's just so similar. Yeah. So I'm curious, how for you, let's take your skin condition. And when you were how did you work through that on your own to come to the place where you are now with doing, what is your story of moving from this place of illness into using this in your work with somatic practices?
I dealt with a skin condition when I was about 10 years old and going all the way until I was about 13, 14. And, as a teenager, having face and neck and arms full of rashes basically really affected my sense of self-worth and the ability to be with other kids. And I started isolating. I developed insomnia because I was scratching myself all night. I would bleed when I would wake up because of all the scratching. And developed insomnia, and then also developed depression. And when I was about 14 years old, I got into personal development. It's a long story how. My parents were not that into it. But I found a book that led me to another book that led me to another book. And suddenly I was reading about hypnosis, meditation, Buddhism, Hinduism, and started meditating. And at 14 years old, meditating about 2 to 3 hours a day,
Wow.
that's what really brought me into this space of looking inside and looking into the mind, looking into the thoughts, looking into the belief systems, and then eventually also looking into the body. And it was the Buddhist practice of Vipassana. There was the tracking the sensations in the body that actually allowed me to fully be with first the condition itself. And then over time, I started really seeing all the ways that I can meet it, not just being with it, but actually loving it, caring for it, appreciating it. And within a couple of months of doing that, my skin disease went away. So that was when I was 14 years old. And that created a lot of rage inside of me because I've been to every Western medicine doctor that was, in the proximity of our house when I was growing up. So eventually I was like, F the system and I need to go. So I ended up traveling the world. When I was 18, I left the country that I'm from, which is Slovenia. Went through homelessness, went through a lot of adverse experiences, ended up in India, studied yoga and specifically Jnana yoga, the yoga of knowledge with the Hindu in the ashrams, then moved to the Amazon, worked with indigenous people for close to 2 years on and off with plant medicine. So went really deep into that space. And then eventually worked in the retreat spaces, opened up 2 retreats, got into facilitation space, was teaching yoga, leading workshops, working with so many different healers, everything from sound healing to alternative medicine, to stem cells, to biohacking retreats. And then eventually I met one of my mentors, Judith Johnson, a few years ago. And she's one of the pioneers in somatic work. And as soon as we met, we connected. We met through one of my business partners. And she just started pouring her life's work into me. And I would talk to her every other day, sometimes like weekly on calls, and ask her questions. How do you work with people in car accidents? How do you work with people that are this? How do you work with people that are that? And she just, at some point, she was like, Jacob, I think you should just come over to my place and just, spend a week with me. So I stayed a week with her in North Carolina. And in that 1 week, I learned more about somatics than I did before that in like the entire coaching certification program, which then led me to spending 3 months with her, re-recording her entire modality and like really being deeply mentored by her for the next 2 years. And then bringing that into the work that I was doing. At that point, I was working with a lot of high performance. I was doing high performance coaching, and then bridging high performance with somatics was a totally different thing. Because it's no longer about how can I achieve in the world and how can I, just like hustle and like do more. But it's also like, what can I remove and like move out of the way and excavate so that the doing actually happens from who I'm being. And I'm no longer chasing something outside of myself to fill the void that's can never be filled, right? But yeah, it was through a lot of like illness and adversity that I got to adopt a lot of different transformational mindsets, and then just being so grateful to have the privilege and the blessing of being poured into by mentors and elders.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story. And you actually did that nicely. It's a very long story that you made very short, but what a privilege to have a mentor like that who can pour into you and really, for her is passing the knowledge forward, right, to the next generation. Because she's in her 80s now, right?
Yeah, she's 83.
Wow. Yeah. So that's beautiful. I'm wondering, thinking about somatics and healing physical illness, like you just described that with the skin condition, but like where does someone start who's looking to heal illness and using somatics as part of that?
Yeah. The depth to which you can go inside of yourself, I would say, is determined by who you have in your corner. And I'm still a very big fan of, mentorship. I have a business mentor. I have Judith in my corner. I have a lot of people who I have for different things. And whenever I'm in a process, and at this point, I've helped for hundreds and hundreds of clients. So I can process myself through almost everything as well. But sometimes I don't want to, and I just call one of the people who I have in my corner as my somatic therapist, or I call my mentor Judith. So I'd say the best place to start is by not doing it alone.
Mm-hmm.
Finding somebody who can guide you in the places that you probably wouldn't go on your own, because if you were able to do it on your own, you would have probably done it already. So that's kind of like the perspective through which I'm coming through, is because a lot of people are saying, I did that already, or I did that, but obviously it hasn't worked for you, right? So you might just need a different perspective or somebody to actually hold you in it. And I know for myself, all the things that I was going through, that Judith was holding me through, for example, in the somatic sessions, I could have probably taken myself to it probably around 40% of the same depth. So
Mm-hmm.
I just want to frame that before I go into the actual answer.
Yeah, I think this is a really important point too, because trauma plays an important part in physical illness. Like that is the one thing that actually now I know is truer than anything else, is that emotional trauma is, like, I would say 90% of illness. I mean, that's pretty bold as an oncologist who was practicing traditional medicine to come out and say that, but that is really what I see. And the one thing is that you need people who know what they're doing in this space, because this is the other thing too, is if someone has trauma and then they're healing illness, you can actually re-traumatize yourself and make the process worse. And actually, that's one of the things where I've become very cautious about the techniques and the tools that I use for people who are healing illness, because the last thing that you want is to re-traumatize and kick up all of this stuff that can just complicate an already traumatic experience of being sick, right? They have a history of trauma and then now they're sick, which is a trauma. And so you can really get yourself into a bad spot. So it is really important to have people in your corner that can guide you in these ways of healing so that you don't end up harming yourself, and being in a worse spot than when you started.
Yeah, and it wouldn't really be trauma informed from me to say exactly how people can start doing it on their own, just because of that and exactly what you shared right now, because it can re-traumatize you if you don't have the capacity to resource yourself when you're inside of that space. So what happens in the somatic session is that we bring all of it up on the surface in a safe space. What that creates is a healing vortex, because your body wants to heal. Your body naturally wants to move towards healing. But there's also a trauma vortex. I love to speak in metaphors and analogies and stories. And if we look at, for example, in relationships, somebody who had an abusive father is likely going to look for a man who's going to be abusive in her relationships. Because the psyche, it's not neurosis, it's just the psyche's way of reenacting the same situations so that it finds a different result, right? So what I wanted to confirm is that I'm worthy, right? I'm worthy, I'm good enough, I can be loved just for who I am. And because the way that was shown to me that it's not through abuse in childhood, then I look at the same level of abuse to show me something different. But that's generally not how it works. That's not going to happen, right? So then like the person finds herself in or himself in the same relationship over and over and over and over again, because psyche's way of wanting to resolve it. So that's what re-traumatization is. So you find yourself in the same situation, bringing in like these deep, vulnerable parts of yourself, but in a way that it's not safe, in a place that it's not safe. And when somebody attempts to bring their own traumatic things up on the surface, but not having the ability to resource themselves, it can create re-traumatization. So I would say, when you ask that question, how can somebody start? I would say what I shared in the beginning is starting with the breath, starting with regulation first. So the more you can learn to regulate yourself, the more you start building the ability to resource yourself. And I would say doing that before bringing anything else up is really, really important. So that's the ability to, if I'm activated, how do I come back to calm? If I'm dysregulated, how do I move myself back to ventral vagal, to the regulated space, right? If I'm triggered by my partner, how do I like calm myself down? So when those practices become like really, ingrained and like natural, then I would say you can start touching something deeper, but not going straight into that. And the biggest learning or the biggest ability that somebody can do in terms of somatics is just learning how to track sensations. And that's also like what a lot of Buddhist meditations are based on. Vipassana, for example, is tracking sensations in the body. Now, what sensation is not, and that's where most people go when I say, what do you notice in the body? They're going to go like, oh, it's just like a lot of frustration because that person said that to me and that person said that. And it's like, nope, that's not what you're noticing in the body. No, that's all in your mind. So it's also a lot of my work is bringing people back to the body, right? So what are you actually noticing when you think about that frustration? When that frustration's there, what do you notice? And the sensations are heaviness, tension, tightness, lightness, tingling, pulsating, heaviness, density, heat, cold. So all of these describe sensations, and it's really important for somebody to get in touch with like actually noticing what's happening in the body.
Beautiful. I'm wondering if there are any misconceptions about somatic therapy that I'm just wondering, because it's like one of those things where in my space, there are definitely things that are misconceptions that people think it's this way with natural healing or whatever, but it's quite the opposite. And I'm wondering if in somatics, if there are any things like that where most people, they think about this and then they're like, oh, they have this misconception about somatics or not, maybe not.
I'm not sure. I think I'm so deep in it that I don't know what people are talking that are not in it.
Yeah.
So I'd be curious to actually like look at that now that you mention it. But I do see something inside of it that I also want to speak to, which is just getting caught up in the trap of needing to always process something. And I think that's something that a lot of people that see this kind of work kind of have the awareness about. It's just like, why do I need to go back into, my traumatic thing? Why do I need to keep processing something? And I'd say the only reason to ever go back to a traumatic memory is if it's in any way, affecting you right now, so that it gets processed and it gets resolved so that you can reorient and realign to living your best life. And I don't think life is at all about healing. I think life is about living, and healing happening as a byproduct of you actually aligning yourself to something bigger. And I think the misconception maybe that, I also had this judgment around somatics for a while was, oh, this is all about just kind of like trauma work. And we keep digging up more and we keep digging up more. And I think this is coming from the place where if we look at how we adopted Western psychology or Western psychotherapy, it was based on like Freudian teachings, right? Which was studying people who were psychotic and neurotic. And at the same time, there was like Jung or right after, right? And there was Adler. And Adlerian psychology, for example, there's a belief that there's an end to therapy. There's an end line. When you reach the end goal and it gets confirmed by the community, you're done. You don't need more therapy. Whereas like the Freudian therapy is like, let's keep digging up more, right? If it's not here, then it's something about your mother. And if it's not about your mother, it's about your grandmother. So I think this was also the judgment I had about somatics, which was like, we can always dig up more. And that's true. So what I find really important is that we don't just do somatic work. For example, in my coaching practice, it's like somatic meets like actual coaching, which is the integration exercises. Like, what do you do and how do you show up in the world? Like, what do you do differently after these peak experiences? Because that's all they are. And it's not that different to psychedelics, right? Like you were able to have like the biggest mind-blowing, eye-opening moments, but actually what do you do with it after, And I'd say that is just as important. I know I strayed a little bit far off.
No, that's perfect. No, actually that's perfect. I think that like, and I love that, idea of the digging and digging and digging and digging, because that's the one thing too that I see is people are like, why do I have to go back? And I don't want to go back into these things. And that's actually how some of the therapies that I found have been the most effective in this setting. Like Psych K has been a very effective practice because it works on the subconscious and you don't actually need to go back and know exactly what happened in that moment. You just have to connect with it and then you can actually release it from the subconscious mind. And I think that people get scared by that idea. This, oh my gosh, it's going to be so deep. And then it's just going to like be more and more and more and more. And we're just going to dig and dig and dig. And so I love that you brought that aspect up. And in my mind, the integration is everything. Like if you don't, and that's actually one of the things that people come out of a water fast, like it is like plant medicine. It's the hard way, it's the hard way of getting that result. But if they don't integrate it, it's for nothing, and so the integration is, I would say, even more important than actually what comes through, because if you don't know how to take now what has been revealed to you and then integrate it into your life, it's gone. But then the other thing about this, and this is a spiritual principle, is that you can't forget something that you have learned that is deeply spiritual. You can pretend like you forgot it and you can ignore it. But once something is revealed that has like a very deep spiritual significance, that's actually always there. And then if you ignore it, they go back on with their life. It actually throws them out of balance because they're not pulling forward what's been revealed to them. And I don't even know if that makes sense, but I know that to be true. And my mentor has also told us that when something, be careful what you know, because once you know it, you can't go back. You can't go in retrograde and pretend like you can. And that's what many humans do. But if you do it, it's going to throw you off balance.
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually the pretending of not knowing is one of the worst things that you can do. And it's also the same with telling the truth, right? And hiding. And if, whoever is listening to this, if you've ever lied about something, you know what carrying a lie feels like in your body. It's just intolerable, right? It's what you can't say that owns you, and what you hide that runs you. Mm-hmm. And in the same way as when you know the truth and you know what needs to be done and what's the right course of action in your life, right? You shouldn't be in that relationship. That this job is not like fulfilling you and that you're meant for something different, etc., etc., etc. And you still choose to look away from that and live not in integrity with what you know to be true. That's where a lot of like this disconnect also tends to happen in the psyche.
That's one of the pieces that I knew that I had to leave Western medicine, that when I had that shared death experience and I, had that realization, like I have to leave, I knew that if I didn't follow that at the end of my life, that I would regret that. And I've been around enough people who at the end of their life, because as an oncologist, I've been with thousands of people who've been at the end of their life. I knew that was their number one regret, that I hadn't had the courage to be authentic to myself. And I actually think that of all the things that come through for my people who fast, it's that connection to their authentic self and then the ability to express it. I think that is the essence of why we're here, right? We're here to find that. Who are we authentically, by stripping back all the conditioning? But then once you find it, you have to actually live it. And that's the hard part. Like, I mean, it was, it came to me, it was like, you got to leave Western medicine. And then I'm like, oh my God, like if I actually follow this is like blowing up my whole life. I've like, I don't know how I'm going to make money. But that's where the rubber hits the road. It's like, can I be who I authentically now have seen myself to be in order to live in, coherence with that truth?
Yeah. And you just can't not, really. It's also a lot of people that I work with tend to see the exact point when they knew that things could be different or should be different, or that something else is meant for them. Even if you look at relationships, right? Majority of the people who are in relationships that they don't like and they're unhappy knew before they got married, that this person is not for me. But something like normally a traumatic imprint was like, no, because all your other partners were toxic, no, go with this one because they're safe, right? But they knew that that's not the right person for them. Or vice versa, right? Something inside of them were like, no, this is just another, like abusive relationship. But because that's what they were used to and that was what was comfortable. They end up staying inside of that space, and people holding to the jobs because that's all they know and because it offers this space of stability. You can't not follow that. Like authenticity is much higher frequency than even love in terms of, the frequency of like emotion. So yeah, once you really recognize what you're meant here for and like where you should be going or like what your soul is calling for, to deny that instinct is to just slowly die.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think that honestly, this is part of what makes people sick. Staying in that relationship that is not right for you, staying in that job that's not right for you, doing things that are not aligned with who you are as your authentic self can make you sick, And so that's the first thing I told you was, I know that you need to have a calm nervous system to heal. The other three are calming the nervous system and then detoxing on all the levels, physically, mentally, emotionally, and then nourishing on all the levels, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And then the fourth thing is aligning with your authentic self. Like that to me is healing. Like those four things, if you can bring those four things together, the body naturally wants to heal once those conditions are met. And I do believe I've seen so many people at the end of their life that regret not having been authentic to themselves. That I don't know this to say that makes people sick, but I can tell you I've seen it enough. And I also see it in my practice that those people who finally come clean with the pieces of their life that are out of integrity and out of connection with their authentic self are the ones that heal.
Yeah. Yeah, it's coming clean, it's making amends, letting go of the resentment, it's forgiving. And in my opinion, it's also the connection to higher power, the connection to something that's larger than ourselves, and then also aligning our lives to something that's bigger.
Yeah.
And I noticed that for me, I was in a constant chase and search of like, the new, for me, was personal development since I was pretty much 15. It was like, what else can I do for myself? What other book can I read so that I am better, right? It's personal development, developing of self. And I think this whole movement is just so obsessed with self. But when you align to something that is bigger than self, like to whatever your purpose is to be here, serving others, serving life, serving God, however that looks, right? Then oftentimes the healing happens as a byproduct. Because even in the anxiety is a big one for a lot of people, right? So anxiety that's there, the anxiety just doesn't exist when you're in focus, when you're living the life that is so much bigger and so much deeper. It's like you don't have time to be anxious about that little thing in your life, right? What that person said or what people think about you when you appear on Instagram or whatever that is. All of that just tends to dissolve when like the focus is so much bigger.
Yeah. Well, and that's the one thing that I've found is that, the beautiful spot where we can create much bigger than we can imagine is when we align our authentic gifts and like what's coming through and what we're passionate about with serving something greater, serving other people, serving the all, serving, the planet. That is when the magic happens, in my mind, is when you're aligning with that, connection with something bigger than yourself so that you're using your gifts, your excitement, your passion to bring something that is providing value in the world. I 100% agree with that. Yeah, I love it. Well, it's been amazing to speak with you. Where can people find you?
So heading over to either my Instagram or my website, jakobgricar.com, or the Instagram has exactly the same handle. And yeah, feel free to check out what's going on there. A lot of it is just me connecting. So feel free to reach out. And if somebody's resonating with all of that, and send a message and say, hi, I saw you on this podcast and would really love to connect. That's one of my favorite things.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for being here. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here today. Please enjoy a previous episode of Born to Heal. And if you found value in our conversation, please subscribe and share with someone who might benefit. Have questions? Drop them in the YouTube comments or message me on Instagram. Links are in the episode description. Remember, just like me, you were born to heal.